Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Beyond Good and Evil, specifically the 20th anniversary edition, which sort of just snuck its way onto Steam a week or two ago, something like that. I had no idea it was coming, and I'm a bit of a Beyond Good and Evil super fan. I very much have a lot of nostalgia for the original game and love playing it back in the day, 20 years ago I suppose now. Now interestingly, PC ports and versions of this previously, which I had actually tried to look at to potentially cover on the channel in times past, have all been terrible. They've been absolutely dog shit. And this one, like at the top, runs kind of perfectly. So that's kind of the main point of the video, the main takeaway. This is in no way a new game, and it is in many ways, even though I carry weight for it with nostalgia, right? It put a big grin on my face going back to it. I don't really know if it's going to capture a new modern audience that doesn't have that nostalgia attachment to it. It's not so much that it's aged poorly, but things like its general design principles are fairly bare and simple intentionally, and you could arguably put them into the category of a kid's game, right? Would your kids enjoy playing this? And the thing is, kids have a pretty discerning palate, and I could see just because you love this 20 years ago doesn't mean your kids are actually going to enjoy this. In fact, there are plenty other showings that capture the childlike whimsy, but potentially bring more intense gameplay mechanics and world design, that sort of stuff. So I'm not trying to crap on this game. Again, I love it, but on the other side of it as well, I probably won't play much more of it. It was nice to go back to it, to dip back in. But yeah, it is very simple, combat-wise and all that sort of stuff. The best comparison I could come up with, because it's difficult to unentangle yourself when you are personally emotionally involved, would be things like, I've gone back and tried to play remasters of like Jak and Daxter, for example, which I have no nostalgia for. I never played them, and I hated that. And I feel like perhaps I would have a similar experience with the most recently re-released like Kingdom Hearts. However, from what I understand, the mechanics in that can actually get a little bit more complex. So maybe that would be a bit different. I'm just using touchstones as best I can. So if you've tried one of these kind of, what would you call them? Like mascot adventure games? You know, things that have that flavor of Rareware. If you try to go back to something that's and you've bounced off of it, it's probably going to be the same here. What even is this game? Well, I mean, look, younger me always thought it was as French as anything, but I mean, I guess that's Ubisoft. It could just be the fact that it was actually imaginative and interesting. But like, you're playing as this all green colored chick called Jade, who's like some sort of photojournalist for hire. That doesn't need to make sense, whatever the mechanics are, that you take photos for essentially for money. You know, on one hand, you're chasing big stories, and then you're getting dragged into this bloody backroom politics stuff, which I have less and less of a tolerance for these days. But more interestingly is, as part of her roots, her and her sort of, I suppose you could say, sidekick slash surrogate father, Paige, the pig man, who has a bloody rocket-powered fart jump. Because of course he does, and no one really bats an eyelid at it. Like, the weirdest thing is that it doesn't really work that well because he's a bit of a harebrained inventor, not to mention, you know, the fact that he's basically shitting himself to try and launch into jumps. But they sort of run a kind of orphanage. The backstory in this world is there is a sort of war between the Earth-like people and the Doms, this sort of shrouded in secrecy invading force. And so there's a whole bunch of displaced orphan children, and you're kind of running this lighthouse where you collect and look after all these kids. None of that really plays into any of the mechanics. That's just the sort of background. It's kind of cool. But you need to run like a protective dome over the lighthouse, and you need to pay the power bill, and that's the setup as to, you know, why you have to engage in the game's economy. So the most interesting kind of side mechanic that plays through is you are taking photos of all the kind of plant and animal life throughout the world to preserve them in case, you know, they get lost in the war, I suppose. Once you go through a whole film strip, you'll get a reward. It could be a zoom. It could be the game's meta currency pearls, which gets used to buy upgrades for your hovercraft that moves you around the world. It's kind of gently open world, but still very much narratively driven. Open in the sense that there's an adventure aspect and you can go looking for extra pearls and that on the side, but it's not exactly exhaustive, which I don't think is a bad thing. Not to get sidetracked and rant, I think open worlds are kind of played out actually, and we're kind of seeing the negative side of them more and more these days, where they're just an excuse to fill out a game for a dev as opposed to actually building an interesting world. This is quickly becoming the rule as opposed to the exception. But yeah, look, it's very charming, and the soundtrack is phenomenal, and even the art design, old graphics and all that, I still think it holds up quite well. But again, it's difficult not to cloud this whole thing in nostalgia. To be as objective as I can in what I try to do with these videos, which is recommend if something's worth your time or your money, I would say if you have absolutely no interest or roots in the original Beyond Good and Evil, this probably is not going to be worth looking at, to be honest. However, if you're someone where it was actually kind of an important cornerstone to your gaming history, it might be worth checking out to go back to, but also bear in mind, like I said, anecdotally, personally, my tastes have become a little bit more demanding. God, I sound like such a pretentious wanker saying that. I'm just saying I enjoyed the 2-hour dip and I do not regret it, but I'm also kind of at a point where I'm kind of happy with that amount to dip back in a way, say goodbye to a classic game that I really loved and then move on. And then I guess the last segment of the graph would be, you know, it does have kid appeal. Would your kids like it? I don't know. They'll probably smile and play it because you make them play it because you enjoyed Beyond Good and Evil yourself. But I think deep down in their heart of hearts, they'd probably rather play like the newest Ratchet and Clank or something like that. Anyway, it's cool to see. It's cool that it exists. It speaks more about Ubisoft's shenanigans and what's going on. I know Ubisoft's a bad word. You're not allowed to like them these days, but they've been releasing some absolute bangers quietly. Assassin's Creed Shadows is going to be fascinating because they have done their best to piss everyone, including me, off. But also this sneaking their back catalogue onto Steam, quiet releases like this with no fanfare. Like, surely this costs money to do. Maybe it was a side project that they did with Slush Fund and it didn't really matter. I don't even know how their company works. Valiant Hearts had a Shadow sequel drop as well. A brilliant game from 10 years ago from Ubisoft's indie attempts. Like, they're doing some weird stuff. Some of it good, some of it terrible. But it's kind of cool to see this happen from a studio that have become kind of allergic to release their AAA brand new day one releases on Steam, for them to just quietly remaster and actually make a really good port of a beloved classic from 20 years ago and just dump it on Steam. I mean, thank you, I guess. So yeah, if I sound confused, it's because I am. Let's see what happens with Star Wars and Assassin's Creed later this year. But anyway, that was a bit of an aside. Team, might just leave it there for the time being and I'll catch you guys on the next one.